Lila kept the farmhouse dark at night, her only light a fading lantern by the bed. The old wood creaked with the wind, but the silence always returned heavier than before. Her daughter slept soundly, her small breaths a rhythm that almost calmed her. Almost. Then came the first knock, soft, deliberate against the window pane. Lila froze, certain it was a branch, but the glass shivered again, harder this time, too measured to be the wind. She tightened the blanket around her child, refusing to look toward the sound. The room cooled, the lantern dimmed, and a faint voice whispered just beyond the glass. Her daughter stirred, smiling in her sleep as though she recognized it. Lila's throat tightened, every instinct screaming not to turn her head. The knocking stopped, and then something began to scratch. The farmhouse stood at the edge of nowhere, pressed against a horizon that never seemed to shift. Its bones were old timber, and its skin a patchwork of peeling paint that whispered of seasons long forgotten. Inside, the air clung heavy with dust, as though even the wind refused to cross the threshold once night fell. Lila moved through its rooms with the measured steps of someone who had learned that every board beneath her feet carried a voice of its own. She carried the silence like a burden, for silence was never truly empty in a house like this. Her daughter Clara had been tucked into the single bed against the far wall of the upstairs room. The girl's hair curled against her cheek, her breath rising and falling in soft waves that seemed fragile enough to shatter. Lila kept the lantern low beside the bed, its glow barely stretching into the corners where the dark collected like a second presence. She leaned against the doorway, watching, listening, waiting. Waiting was all she seemed to do in this place. Waiting for the night to pass. Waiting for her heart to stop leaping at every small sound. Waiting for the cold hours to end. The land around the farmhouse gave little comfort. No neighbors within sight, only endless stretches of fields that looked the same by day and seemed alive by night. The windows groaned when the wind pushed against them, and the rafters above her head swayed with faint complaints. Lila told herself that old houses always spoke, but these walls seemed to carry voices that wanted her to listen. And she did listen, even when she told herself not to. That was when the first knock came. It was not loud, not sharp, just the softest tap against the glass of the upstairs window. Lila froze, her body refusing her command to move. The lantern's flame trembled and cast uneven shadows along the plaster walls. She waited, listening harder than she had ever listened in her life, her ears straining for another sound. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing into her ribs, thickening the air around her. She told herself it had been a branch. The tree outside had long limbs that bent with the wind, but then came the second knock, this time slower, firmer, deliberate. The sound vibrated faintly through the room as if the window itself had flinched. Clara stirred in her sleep, lips curling into a half-smile, a murmur rising from her throat as if she dreamed of something pleasant. Lila's blood chilled as she noticed the smile, as though the knock had not disturbed the child but comforted her. The lantern dimmed. Its flame shrank until it looked like a dying ember clinging to life. Lila hurried to adjust the wick, but no matter how she turned the knob, the light refused to grow. The corners of the room deepened into shadow, and from the window there came the faintest sound. Not a knock now, a voice, soft, whispering, words too faint to understand yet too close to deny. Lila's chest tightened, her throat constricted. Every instinct screamed for her to turn, to see what waited beyond the glass, but she could not bring herself to move. She fixed her eyes on Clara, clutching the blanket tight around the girl's small shoulders. The whisper grew clearer, weaving through the sound of the wind until it rose like a melody. Clara's smile widened in her sleep, and she whispered something back, though her words were broken, dream-soaked. The scratching began, slow at first, a dragging sound along the pane. A finger perhaps, or something sharper. The sound cut across the silence, pulling a shiver through the air like teeth drawn across stone. Lila pressed her hands over Clara's ears, though the child did not wake. The scratching grew longer, deeper, until it seemed to curl into the room itself, leaving invisible marks behind. She forced her eyes to the floorboards, refusing the pull of the sound, refusing to give the window her gaze. But she felt it, that presence, watching, waiting. The hours passed heavy, each minute stretching into eternity. The scratching would stop, only to start again after long silence. The whisper would rise and fade like a tide that would not retreat. Lila dared not move, dared not sleep. Her body stiffened into a statue beside the bed, every muscle locked against the temptation to glance toward the glass. She told herself that if she looked, if she gave it even a sliver of her attention, something would change, something would come inside. At last the pale wash of dawn bled into the sky. Light crept across the fields and spilled faintly through the window. The scratching ceased, the whisper was gone. The lantern brightened on its own, as if it had never faltered at all. Clara opened her eyes, stretching with the careless innocence of morning. She looked toward the window, her face serene, and spoke in a voice that was not her own. "They are waiting." The floor groaned beneath Lila's feet. The air cooled again, something shifted against the glass. The day passed as if it had been stolen from someone else's life. Sunlight poured across the farmhouse walls, chasing away the shadows, but the memory of the night clung to Lila like damp cloth that would not dry. She went about her chores with trembling hands, each creak of the house reminding her of the voice she had refused to hear. Clara followed her with laughter, skipping through the narrow halls with ribbons of joy too bright for the gloom pressing on her mother. The child seemed untouched, untroubled, and when she glanced toward the windows her eyes glimmered with something that unsettled Lila more than the darkness itself. She wanted to believe it had been a dream. That exhaustion had twisted her senses, that the knock and the whisper were nothing but echoes from her weary mind. Yet when she passed the upstairs window, she saw faint lines etched into the glass. Thin, curved scratches as if a fingernail had traced across it again and again, carving invisible letters no one should read. She pressed her hand to the cool surface, and the glass seemed to pulse beneath her palm. She yanked it back quickly, heart pounding, and whispered a prayer she had long since forgotten. By afternoon, the sky had begun to dim, clouds gathering into a bruised mass that swallowed the light. The air thickened, heavy with the weight of coming rain. Lila worked faster, pulling the shutters closed, locking the doors, checking every window twice. Clara protested, asking why the house had to be so dark, why she could not sit by the window and watch the storm roll in. Lila gave no answer beyond a sharp shake of her head. She could not let her daughter see, not again, not when the voice might still be waiting on the other side. That night the lantern burned brighter. She filled it to the brim with oil, set another by the door, and lit candles along the walls. The upstairs room glowed with trembling light, each flame fighting against the shadows that pressed closer with every passing hour. Clara curled beneath the blankets, her small hands folded neatly against her chest, but her eyes remained open, wide, and glimmering in the glow. She did not fight sleep. Instead, she watched her mother with a patience that felt wrong in a child so young. When the first knock came, it was sharper than before, a solid tap that rattled the glass as though it demanded entry. Lila gritted her teeth and forced herself not to turn. She tightened her grip on the lantern handle, whispering steady breaths through clenched lips. Clara stirred, her gaze shifting toward the window. A smile pulled across her face again, the same dream-born curve of lips that chilled Lila's spine. Then came the voice, louder this time, still faint but clearer, carrying syllables that tugged at the edges of recognition. The sound slithered into the room like smoke, curling around the furniture, wrapping itself around Lila's ears. Her skin prickled. She pressed her palms flat against the sides of her head, but the words seeped through anyway, low and melodic. Clara's lips moved in rhythm, her silent responses echoing the unseen speaker. The scratching returned, fierce, faster. Long dragging strokes that clawed against the pane with desperate insistence. The sound filled the room, sharp enough to pierce bone. Lila snapped her eyes shut, rocking gently in place, whispering a plea to any god who might hear her. She felt the urge to look growing inside her chest like a knot of fire, pulling at her neck, dragging her toward the glass. Her muscles burned with the effort of resistance. The candles flickered. One by one, their flames bent sideways as though the room itself leaned toward the window. Wax dripped in frantic trails, hissing against the wooden floor. The lantern's glow sputtered. A deep chill wrapped itself around Lila's shoulders, pressing into her bones, and with it came a scent she could not explain. Damp earth, cold water, something old, something buried, and then Clara spoke. "They are calling me," she whispered, though her eyes were still closed. "They say I belong with them." Lila clutched the blanket tighter around her daughter, shaking her head violently though no one watched. "You are mine," she whispered under her breath, though the words were for herself alone. Her hands trembled, her heart pounded, and every second dragged heavier than the last. The scratching ceased, the voice fell silent. For a moment, only the sound of the storm filled the air. Rain pelted the roof, thunder groaned in the distance, and the farmhouse shook with the weight of the wind. Lila exhaled, believing it had ended, that the terror had passed with the night. Then came the third sound, a laugh, soft, childlike, coming not from the window but from within the room itself. The laugh carried no warmth. It was light and airy, the kind of sound a child might make when discovering a hidden toy, yet it twisted through the air with a sharpness that set Lila's skin crawling. She clutched Clara against her chest, though the girl was still wrapped in heavy sleep. The room pressed in closer, the walls shrinking, the lantern light trembling as if it too had heard the laughter and wished to flee. Lila turned slowly, scanning the room, refusing to let her gaze drift toward the window. Her heart hammered so loudly she feared it might wake her daughter, but Clara slept on, her face peaceful, her lips curved in a strange half-smile. The laugh rose again, this time from the corner where the shadows gathered deepest. It echoed in a way that defied the size of the room, filling the air as if more than one voice shared in the cruel delight. She whispered a prayer she could barely remember, each word catching on her tongue. Her hands shook, her body stiff with terror, but still she refused to look at the glass. That had become her one rule, her shield against whatever waited beyond. She knew instinctively that if she broke it, if she let her eyes meet what lingered there, the boundary between inside and outside would crumble. Yet the sound tempted her, pulling at her will, daring her to look. The storm raged against the farmhouse. Rain lashed at the windows, wind howled through the cracks in the old wood, and thunder rolled across the hills like some giant beast waking in the dark. With each flash of lightning, the room glowed white for a heartbeat, and in those moments the shadows seemed to move. She thought she saw small shapes darting along the walls, too quick to catch, too strange to be tricks of light. Another laugh, closer now, directly beside her ear. Lila flinched, clutching Clara tighter, her breath ragged. She could feel a chill on her neck as though tiny lips had brushed against her skin. Her knees weakened and she stumbled back until her spine pressed against the bed frame. She wanted to scream, but no sound would rise. The laughter rippled once more, softer now, retreating back toward the window, leaving her trembling in its wake. Clara stirred, her eyes fluttered open, wide and unblinking. They were not the eyes of a child waking from sleep, soft and confused, but eyes that gleamed with clarity as though she had been awake all along. She fixed them on her mother, then on the window. A faint giggle escaped her lips, blending perfectly with the echo that had filled the room moments before. "They said you cannot keep me," Clara whispered, though her tone carried none of her usual innocence. The words were plain, sharp, deliberate. Lila shook her head violently, clutching her tighter, rocking her as if to erase the words. "You are mine," she breathed, though her voice broke into pieces. She buried her face in her daughter's hair, refusing to let the window's call pull Clara away. But the child's body grew stiff in her arms, her gaze locked on the pane. The scratching returned, sudden and furious. It tore against the glass in long shrieks like nails dragged through stone. The lantern flame shot high, casting wild shapes across the walls. Lila's every nerve screamed at her to run, but she could not leave the room, could not leave the window unguarded. Her body swayed with the rhythm of panic, her arms aching from holding Clara so tight. Then, without warning, the glass cracked. A sharp line split across the pane, thin as a hair yet loud as a gunshot. Lila gasped, clutching Clara tighter, her eyes fixed on the fracture though she had sworn not to look. Another crack followed, branching from the first, a jagged spiderweb spreading slowly outward. Behind the glass, something shifted. A shadow darker than the night, its form pressed close, its outline wrong. Clara smiled again. "They are almost here." The wind roared, the thunder shook the floor. The lantern guttered, its light shrinking to a faint glow that barely reached the foot of the bed. In that suffocating dimness, Lila felt the presence swell, filling the room with unseen weight. She closed her eyes and whispered a single command to herself. "Do not look, do not look, do not look." The storm raged for hours, but the laughter never left. It rose and fell with the thunder, a chorus of voices just beyond the glass, waiting. Clara whispered in her sleep, her words tangled with theirs, her voice no longer her own. Lila sat frozen in her chair, every muscle aching, every breath a battle against the dread that pressed against her chest. By dawn the storm had broken. The air was heavy with damp, the farmhouse groaning in relief. The cracks in the window remained, pale scars etched across the glass. Clara stirred and woke with a stretch, her eyes soft and childlike once more, as though nothing had happened. She asked for breakfast, her voice gentle, her smile bright. But Lila could not move, could not speak, for she knew the night had not ended. It had only begun. From the corner of the room, faint but certain, the sound of fingernails traced across the wall. Morning should have brought safety, yet the light of day could not wash away the memory of the laughter. Lila moved through the farmhouse in silence, her daughter skipping beside her with carefree steps that belonged to someone untouched by fear. Clara hummed softly, a tune that seemed too old for her years, its notes sinking into the wood of the house until every board seemed to echo it back. Lila avoided the upstairs window, but her eyes pulled toward it again and again, toward the cracks that now spread like veins across its surface. She knew she should leave, pack what little they had and walk away, no matter how far, no matter how heavy the journey. Yet the land beyond the farmhouse stretched endless and empty. There was no neighbor to turn to, no village in reach, only miles of barren fields and the lingering storm. Leaving felt as dangerous as staying, and worse, Clara did not want to go. When Lila spoke of travel, of escape, the child shook her head and whispered that they had promised to visit her soon. The hours crawled. Lila cooked but could not eat. She scrubbed the floors though no dirt stained them. Her hands ached, her eyes burned, but she refused to rest. Rest meant weakness. Weakness meant listening, and listening meant hearing them again. Clara watched her mother's movements with strange calm, as if she were studying waiting. Lila caught the girl more than once standing at the foot of the stairs, her head tilted toward the window above, her lips moving in silent rhythm with unheard voices. When the sky dimmed toward evening, dread wrapped its fingers tighter around Lila's chest. She prepared the lanterns again, filled them until the oil spilled over, set candles in every corner. But the farmhouse seemed to swallow the light, pulling the glow inward until the shadows grew heavier rather than weaker. She shut the curtains, yet the cracked window remained, glowing faintly with the last smear of twilight as if mocking her attempts at concealment. The first sound came earlier that night, not a knock. Not a scratch, a breath. Long and steady, fogging the glass from the outside. Lila's body seized. She pulled Clara close, wrapping the blankets tight, whispering her silent mantra, "Do not look." But Clara wriggled free, her small hands clutching the edge of the mattress as she leaned toward the window. Her eyes shone wide and eager, as though she were greeting a long-expected guest. "They are waiting for me," Clara said, her voice dreamy. "They said the cracks are doors." Lila's heart thundered. She grabbed her daughter, dragging her back, forcing her against her chest. "You are not theirs," she hissed through trembling lips. She rocked her, whispering prayers, though each syllable broke beneath the weight of terror. But Clara fought against her, twisting her arms, reaching outward, her gaze fixed on the pane. The scratching returned, harsher now, each stroke dragging deep across the glass, widening the cracks. The lantern flames bent toward the window, pulled by some unseen gravity. The air chilled, every breath leaving mist that clung to the air far too long. Then came the whisper, no longer faint but clear, as if spoken directly into her ear. "Give her to us." Lila's vision swam. She pressed her palms against her ears, but the voice seeped through, vibrating in her bones. Clara smiled, her head tilting as if she heard something sweeter than her mother's heartbeat. She opened her mouth as though to answer, but Lila clamped her hand over the girl's lips, tears burning her eyes. The cracks spread further. A long line snaked across the glass, splintering into dozens of jagged arms. Each fracture glowed faintly, pulsing like veins filled with pale fire. The scratching grew faster, more frantic, until the room shook with the sound. Lila bit down on her lip to stop herself from screaming. She knew if she gave them her voice, if she answered, it would bind her as surely as it was binding Clara. The air grew heavy, the candles dimmed to pinpricks. The lantern hissed and went out, its flames smothered, though no wind touched it. In the sudden gloom, the window became the brightest thing in the room, its fractures glowing with unnatural light. Lila's chest seized with terror. She dragged Clara back, retreating to the farthest corner, her back pressed against the wall. The laughter rose again, not from the window this time, but from within the walls themselves. Small voices, dozens of them, giggling, whispering, crawling through the wood like termites. They seeped through every board, every crack, surrounding her, filling her ears until she thought her skull might split. Clara struggled in her arms, her voice muffled, her body thrashing to break free, and then, without warning, the glass shattered. The sound exploded through the room, sharp as thunder. Shards scattered across the floor, but not one cut her skin. Instead, they hung in the air, suspended, glowing faintly before dissolving into mist. Beyond the broken frame, there was no storm, no night sky. Only a vast expanse of darkness rippling with movement. Shapes writhed within it, small and pale, like countless children pressing against a veil. Their eyes glowed faintly, their mouths stretched in eternal smiles. Clara reached out, her arms slipping free of her mother's grip. "They are here," she whispered, her voice carrying joy Lila had never heard from her before. The darkness leaned closer. The pale faces pressed harder against the opening. Fingers began to curl through the frame, thin and long, searching for purchase. Lila screamed at last, dragging Clara backward with all her strength, her body slamming against the doorframe. The sound seemed to stir the things beyond, their laughter rising, their whispers intensifying until the air shook. But then, just as suddenly as it had come, the vision faded. The window was whole again, the cracks gone, the glass unbroken, the night outside calm and still, only the rain sliding down its surface. Clara slumped against her mother, asleep once more, her face soft and innocent. Lila's breath came in shudders, her arms aching from the struggle, her mind torn between terror and disbelief. Yet she knew it had been real, for from the inside of the glass, faint and fresh, the marks of tiny hands pressed outward. The farmhouse felt different the following day. The air no longer carried the scent of rain, but something stranger, a sweetness that clung to the walls and seeped into the floorboards. Lila awoke with her arms wrapped tightly around Clara, though she did not remember falling asleep. The girl's breathing was steady, her face pressed softly against her mother's chest, but Lila could not shake the memory of the pale hands pushing through the window. When she dared to glance toward it in the morning light, she saw them still. Not the figures themselves, but the imprints. Small, smudged outlines, dozens of them, pressed against the inside of the glass. She pressed her hand against the pane, trembling. The glass was cold, colder than it should have been in the warmth of morning. She pulled her hand back quickly, fear rising sharp in her throat. The house groaned, the boards beneath her feet creaking as if in sympathy. Clara yawned, stretched, and rose with an energy that unsettled her mother. She hummed that same old tune, skipping through the hallway, never once glancing back. Lila followed her closely all day, unwilling to let her out of sight. The chores went undone, the food untouched. She trailed behind Clara as the girl moved through the house, speaking under her breath as if in conversation. Sometimes she laughed quietly, nodding as though listening to some unheard companion. Lila would seize her shoulders, demand she stop, but Clara only smiled with an innocence that was no longer convincing. As the sky darkened again, dread settled over Lila heavier than before. She set the lanterns, though she knew the light would not hold them back. She pushed a heavy dresser against the upstairs window, though she knew no barrier could keep them out. She held Clara tighter, whispering promises, whispering prayers. Yet deep within, she wondered if her daughter even wanted to be kept. The first knock came earlier still, before the sun had fully set. It was harder than ever, shaking the dresser as though it were no more than a toy. Clara stirred with excitement, her body straining to rise. Lila forced her back, pinning her beneath the blanket, clutching her as if her grip alone could anchor the girl to this world. The whisper followed. Not faint now, not distant, clear, so close it seemed to breathe directly against her ear. Let her come. Lila's heart slammed against her ribs. She pressed her hands against her ears, but the voice only grew louder. Clara giggled beneath the blanket, wriggling with glee, her words muffled but unmistakable. "They are calling. I must go." The scratching resumed, wild and furious, tearing against the glass, clawing against the wood of the window frame. The dresser shuddered with each strike. The lanterns dimmed, their flames bending toward the sound. The air chilled until each breath left a cloud before her lips. Shadows pooled in the corners, thick and heavy, spilling across the floor like water. Then came the laughter, not one voice, not two, dozens. It filled the room from wall to wall, seeping from the cracks, rising from beneath the floorboards, echoing through the ceiling beams. Lila's body shook, her teeth clattering as the sound pressed against her skull. Clara writhed in her arms, her small hands clawing toward the window, her eyes bright with hunger. The dresser groaned, sliding an inch from the wall, though no hands touched it. The window rattled violently, its cracks glowing faintly once more. And then through the fractures, the faces returned. Dozens of pale children, their smiles wide, their eyes unblinking. Their hands pressed against the glass, overlapping, pushing, searching. Their voices mingled into one, a chorus of whispers that tore through Lila's mind. "She is ours, she is ours. She is ours," Lila screamed, clutching Clara tighter, dragging her back from the dresser. The child fought, her strength unnatural, her laughter shrill and piercing. Lila fell to her knees, rocking her desperately, sobbing prayers that dissolved into broken cries. The room shook, the lanterns guttered, the window splintered further, and then silence. The laughter cut short, the scratching ceased, the whispers died, the dresser stilled, the cracks dimmed. Clara went limp in her arms, her breathing soft once more. For a moment Lila thought it had ended, that the nightmare had broken. She wept into her daughter's hair, trembling, whispering gratitude to a god she barely believed in. But then Clara's voice rose again. Not in her own tone, but in many. A chorus layered through a single small mouth. "We are inside now." The shadows shifted. From beneath the bed, from behind the dresser, from the very walls, small shapes crawled forward. Pale hands reached into the light, clutching at the floor, dragging thin bodies into view. Their smiles glowed in the lantern glow, their eyes dark pits of hunger. One after another they emerged, filling the room with their tiny frames, surrounding the mother and child pressed against the wall. Lila clutched Clara tight, her breath broken, her body frozen. The children in the window no longer waited outside. They were here inside the farmhouse, their laughter swelling once more, their hands reaching closer. The farmhouse floor groaned beneath the weight of things that should not have been. Pale shapes slipped from the walls, crawling from the spaces between boards, spilling from the ceiling beams as if the wood itself had given birth to them. They were children, yet not children. Too thin, too long, their limbs bending at angles that mocked the shape of bone. Their eyes glowed faintly in the lantern light, wide and unblinking, their smiles carved too deep across their faces. Lila pressed Clara against her chest, her back scraping against the cold wall. Her hands trembled as she tried to cover her daughter's eyes, but Clara's lids fluttered open. The girl did not scream, she did not cry, she only smiled as if reunited with dear friends long kept from her. She whispered their names, words Lila did not understand, words older than her child could ever have known. The pale shapes froze at the sound, their heads tilting in unison, their smiles widening until their faces split with glee. The lanterns sputtered. Shadows leapt across the room, thick as smoke. The children of glass crept closer, their fingers dragging along the floorboards, leaving trails of frost. Their laughter returned, softer now, more intimate, as though they whispered directly into her ear. Lila's heart pounded, her throat closing against the weight of dread. She rocked Clara, whispering that she was hers, always hers, that no one could take her. But Clara leaned forward, stretching her arms toward them, her voice threaded with longing. "They are here for me, Mama," they promised. The words cut deeper than any claw. Lila shook her head, gripping her daughter until her arms ached, but Clara's body strained away from her hold, pulled by an unseen tether. The shapes circled, their small frames weaving in and out of the lantern glow, their hands brushing against the blankets with feather-light touches. One pressed its face close, eyes black voids, teeth sharp where no child's teeth should be. It breathed against her cheek, cold as the grave. The dresser against the window shuddered, sliding aside on its own. The pane rattled, the cracks returning, glowing like veins of ice. The glass bulged inward, soft as water, and through it came more pale faces, pressing, crowding their whispers a storm. The house shook, the air thickened. Lila's vision swam, her mind tearing under the weight of voices chanting the same words again and again. "Give her, give her. Give her," she screamed, not words, only raw sound. She clutched Clara with every ounce of strength left in her, refusing to let go, refusing to surrender. Her voice cracked, her body shook, her tears burned hot trails down her face. The children recoiled for a moment, their smiles faltering, their heads twitching in displeasure. Lila saw her chance and dragged Clara toward the door, stumbling, gasping, fighting against the clutching hands that grasped at her ankles. She tore free, bursting into the hallway, the lantern swinging wildly in her grasp. The house was alive. Shadows raced along the walls, doors slammed open and shut, the staircase groaned beneath invisible feet. The air was filled with laughter, hundreds of voices weaving into a cacophony of joy and hunger. She stumbled down the steps, dragging Clara, her bare feet slapping against the cold wood. The front door loomed ahead, but when she reached it, it would not budge. No matter how she pulled, how she twisted the knob, it held fast. Behind her, the pale children descended the stairs, their hands gripping the banister, their teeth gleaming in the lantern glow. Clara laughed with them, her small body writhing, her voice joining the chorus. "Let me go, Mama, I want to go." Lila screamed again, pulling her daughter tight, her body shaking with the force of her desperation. She turned toward the kitchen, stumbling through the doorway, slamming the lantern onto the counter. The flame flared high, casting the room in violent light. For a moment the children hesitated, their forms shrinking against the glare. Lila seized the moment, yanking open the cellar door, dragging Clara down into the darkness below. The cellar smelled of earth and damp stone. It was cold, the kind of cold that sank into bone. Lila pressed her back against the door, clutching Clara, whispering frantic prayers. The lantern flickered, throwing long shadows across the stacked jars and broken shelves. She listened, breath ragged, for the sound of pursuit, but the laughter had stopped. The silence pressed thick, heavier than the dark. Clara's voice broke it. "They are already here." The lantern dimmed. From the far corner of the cellar, small hands rose from the soil, clawing upward, pulling pale bodies into the room. One by one they emerged, their eyes glowing faint, their smiles wide. Lila backed into the stone wall, clutching Clara so tightly the girl whimpered. But the child's eyes shone with joy, her arms outstretched, her voice bright. "I am ready." Lila screamed, falling to her knees, clutching her daughter against her chest, begging them to take her instead. But the children only tilted their heads, their laughter soft, pitying. Their voices rose together, a chorus that wrapped around her mind, squeezing until she could barely think. "You cannot keep her. She was never yours." The cellar filled with their pale glow, their laughter swelling, their hands reaching. Lila pressed Clara's face into her shoulder, sobbing, begging, but the girl twisted free at last. With sudden strength, she slipped from her mother's arms, running forward into their embrace. The pale children closed around her, their hands brushing her hair, their whispers filling her ears. Clara turned once, her eyes bright, her smile radiant. "Do not look at the window after midnight, Mama. That is when they come." The lantern went out. When dawn broke, the farmhouse stood silent. The windows were whole, the glass unbroken, no cracks, no scratches. The rooms were empty, the beds neatly made, the floors clean of footprints. No sign of struggle remained. Only the faint sound of laughter drifted through the halls, soft and distant, like echoes caught between walls. And from the upstairs window, if one looked closely enough, the faint outline of a small child's hand pressed against the inside of the glass, waiting.